Yes, for those of you who are new to Embercombe, Embercombe is a beautiful 50-acre valley on the edge of Dartmoor in the United Kingdom. It's a place to find deep connection with nature, the wild nature around us and the wild nature within us. And our mission is to empower everyone through this connection with nature to co-create a regenerative, flourishing future for all species. So tonight, we're all going to explore together specifically the topic of rewilding as reverence. And we are joined tonight by an experienced panel, Mac Macartney, founder of Embercombe. Hi, Mac.
Hi, hello there.
Laura Fairs, the rewilding lead at Embercombe. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
And Ashleigh Brown, the education coordinator and facilitator at Ecosystems Restoration Camp, which is about bringing everyday people together to restore degraded ecosystems from the ground up. Hi, Ashleigh. So Embercombe has partnered with Ecosystem Restoration Camps to develop our rewilding camps. And there are hands-on experience weekends facilitated by Laura and Ashleigh about rewilding the land, rewilding ourselves, and rewilding society. And our next rewilding camp runs in Embercombe from the 14th to the 17th of October. In these camps, we're not only looking at practical elements of rewilding, but a lot more as well at the more kind of spiritual aspects, and that's what we're going to touch on today. So we've got about a 30 minutes talk, and it will be followed by 15 to 20 minutes of questions to any of our panel members. And so before we start asking questions, Laura is gonna offer us a bit of grounding the Embercombe way.
Thanks, Clemence. Yeah, before we started, I just wanted to give a brief but important nod to autumn, the season we're in now. And I just feel that it's such a magical time of year that I didn't want it to go unmentioned in this talk. I think a season that shows us that we can be beautiful, creative, colourful and intuitive, and a time when the world around us shows us that it knows what to do when it needs to retreat and store goodness, make reserves for the winter ahead. And a time that we can feel this tangible shift from the long days with hot sun to these long drawn out evenings and beautiful crisp sunny mornings that still show us the beauty of the end of the summer. So it feels to me like a time for storytelling and fire circles and lots of sensory smells in the woodlands and the magic old time of year where we see the mycelium and the nuts and the berries and the sense that anything is possible in the world. So before we started, I just wanted to send some gratitude out to the land and the way it holds us in wonder and shows us there's so much beauty to discover.
Thank you, Laura. Good. So we're gonna start with a very simple question to you, Laura. How would you define rewilding and what does it entail?
Thank you, Clemence. Yes, so in a nutshell, rewilding is about restoring the land, restoring ecosystems and landscapes to the point where nature is able to carry out the functions and carry out what it would do without our assistance. So unfortunately, we've altered our landscape so much that we are in a position where often nature cannot look after itself because we have removed much, or we are controlling much of the natural processes that need to happen. So it's about restoring our relationship with the world into a place where nature can take care of itself. And in rewilding, what differs in rewilding from nature conservation is that instead of holding land in a fixed state where we carry out repetitive management to hold something, for example, a heathland, if we wanted to keep a heathland in a fixed state, we would repeat management over and over again to hold it in a state. What we do with rewilding is that we work to restore the processes that would happen naturally in that environment, and if necessary, the species that are missing, in order that those processes can then restore the land themselves, rather than us having to keep repeating something and holding it in stasis. So, and key to rewilding is about restoring these natural processes, restoring the species that are missing. And when we talk about natural processes, they can be, these natural processes are the interactions that happen on the planet that essentially make nature happen, if you like, and that can be anything. It could be big, like a storm or a fire or a flood, but it can also be very small, like the mycelium operating in the soil web, and animals, you know, death, decay, and the recycling of nutrients back into the system. So we talk a lot in rewilding, nature conservation rewilding, about these natural processes. And often, if these are missing from our landscape, it's about either reintroducing them, re-allowing them back, or if necessary, using proxies, so sort of substitutes for those things that are missing. And it's also about restoring the connection for people back into that landscape as well, and working out where our place sits in that rewilding system. There is also a system of human rewilding, which is about dismantling the domestication of and civilization. So the original human rewilding movement is about restoring humans' place back in the wild. So which we will also touch on, I think, possibly a bit later on. So there's sort of these two aspects of rewilding that we look at, and most commonly in this country, when people are referring to rewilding, it's about the land-based rewilding, so the restoration of ecosystems and landscapes.
Thank you, Laura. And Mac, I was wondering, I mean, Laura's explained a lot already, I think, but I was wondering what inspired the rewilding of Embercombe?
I think, like like many things, it was a combination of factors. One, I think, was a conversation of us going right back to the beginning and saying, what are we doing here? What is the purpose that sits underneath this brave and sort of sometimes almost like feeling of we're working so hard, but are we actually achieving the goals that we set out to achieve? You know what? So asking questions. And at the very heart of Embercombe's mission from the very beginning, really, was a deep connection with nature. But it wasn't expressed directly in that way. It was expressed, I suppose, mostly through the invitation that the Indigenous people made, who taught myself, Joey, and some others in our older Embercombe community. Their invitation that we would build a stone circle here on this land. And that land is a calling to the people of these islands, that they should remember our Mother Earth, that they should remember that everything that they enjoy, everything that they delight in, colour, scent, the seasons, such as autumn, which Laura mentioned, children, the passage of moons, you know, sunrise, sunset. I mean, everything is given to us, as it were, by this extraordinary experience we call life on this planet. And they're feeling that because we had lost awe and wonder, lost reverence, lost the knowledge, the sense, the deep knowing that we owe everything to something else. bigger than us, that we find ourselves so bereft and so sort of, I don't know, wandering, rather lost, talking about seeking purpose and all these things, when in a sense, so much is right under our noses. So we asked questions, and those questions took us back to the original things which sort of brought Embercombe in this last 20-25 year version, because of course Embercombe, the valley, existed for millennia before then, forwards. And so those are those reasons. I think another one was that we had been running Embercombe the land as a sort of small holding with, and we'd had a wonderful time doing that, and inspirational inputs from a whole variety of people that had allowed that era to flower and blossom, but ultimately the knowledge that the amount of work and the amount of input and everything that went into operating Embercombe in that way took a huge amount of effort and energy and money. And if we were to, as it were, take our hands off the land in the sense that we were, and enable and allow natural processes to occur, would people's experience at Embercombe be any the less for it? And I think the clear answer to that was no, they wouldn't. And in many ways, in many ways, they would benefit. And so we had a lovely fusion, I think, really, between the practical and the more, and if you like, the whole sense of answering the question, what are we here for? What are we here to do? And a big part of that was to welcome people through our gates and, as it were, joining hands, lead them and ourselves into an experience here in this valley that reminds us of all the things that actually bring us greatest joy, sense of belonging, community, and all those other lovely and good things.
Thank you, Mac. And I wonder, Laura, when Mac is speaking about these different aspects, what has been your concrete experience in the last few years that you've been here in rewilding the land? Like what other than the practicalities, what has touched you maybe in a surprising manner in doing the rewilding of the land?
I think any time that you spend on the land becomes a meaningful experience. And often people often say to me when they come to Embercombe and they say, oh wow, you work in rewilding, that must be amazing. And I think, yeah, I spend a lot of time sat by a laptop. But when I go onto the land, I try every time I'm at Embercombe, I try and go on the land, because you don't need to know what's going to surprise you, because as soon as you step foot on the land, there is always something going on, and there is always some sort of process happening on the land. And often it's not what you thought you were going out to look for. So, for example, at the moment, just at the end of August, someone asked me to go out and do a piece on the land to talk about the wildflower seeds that are ready to harvest, or ready to shed their seeds. And we went out with all intention, and all the flowers have been flattened because the badger's been using the field. But in that, the magic of that is that the badger is carrying out a process on the land, and by stepping foot onto the land is witnessing what's going on, and what the different other than the humans, there's a whole load of stuff going on out there which we only need to step out onto to see a small window into. And so that for me is the bit that is always exciting, is there's always something going on, there's still something to find, there's bits that you've not been to yet. And so with that, I guess if you're asking me what you know, what becomes spiritual about that is, I mean, for me, I don't necessarily see it as spiritual. For me, it's just about connection. It's just about going out and being open to those experiences. And part of rewilding is about letting go of the control of, oh, I'm expecting this piece of land to do this, or I want this piece of land to be like that. So, you know, part of the inner rewilding work is about challenging those conceptions in ourselves about what we want something to be, and actually sitting back and delighting in what it is being for us, rather than, you know, rather than us trying to exert ourselves over it. And so I think for me, that exercise, that ongoing exercise in letting go of control and letting rewilding show us what the land wants to be, is part of the magic, if you know, or the blessing in a way of being on the land. So yeah, I think that's probably within that, you know, when you're there and you're experiencing that, whether that be the cracking open of a seed pod that's ripening, or whether it be finding a badger's dug a hole somewhere that you weren't expecting them to, or isn't necessarily convenient for us, in that moment there's growth there for me, as well as the land. Yeah, so I think that's what I'd say.
Thank you. And Ashleigh, I was wondering, you know, in this context of all these surprising things, how the rewilding and the more kind of connectedness and perhaps spirituality come together for you, and in the movement that you've helped created.
It's been a long journey for me where this subject is concerned, and I feel like it's started from childhood. I'm sure many of you will agree that children believe in the magic of the world, and a lot of that comes from their experiences of interacting with our kin, and the sheer awe and wonder of discovering a frog, or a fish or something, you know. It's just like totally awe-inspiring to them, and I was very much like that as a child, and I'd like to think that I never really lost it. I never really lost the awe and wonder of the magic and majesty of our world, but I guess I just sort of forgot about it for a while, and yeah, but it was still there, and I would feel it when there was a particularly beautiful sunset, or like seeing a fish jump out of the ocean, or, you know, some sort of nugget of nature's majesty would like bring me back in and remind me of the earth's spirit, I suppose. But I always when I was growing up, I always associated spirituality with being something that wasn't me, that I didn't really understand, something very other from my life's experiences. And it wasn't until fairly recently that I started considering the way that I see the world and my relationship with our kin to be a form of spirituality. Because if I really tune in, you know, if I like purposefully sit somewhere and like forge a connection, I can feel the earth spirit, and you know, it's like a kind of sense language that I've like honed now, where I can like tune into it, and it's such a wonderful feeling. It's such a deep feeling of like of belonging to the oneness, that, you know, is helping me with my fear of death, is making me feel like I'm never alone, and gives me great comfort and joy. I'm gonna cry. And that, I guess that has always been there, but I've never really like actively sought out the connection. And it's there for all of us. And I feel like a part of what we really need to do, and what the ecosystem restoration camps movement is trying to do, is to give people opportunities where they remember that the earth has a spirit, and there's a life force energy of the earth that you could also call a spirit, that runs through us all. We're all connected to it. When we die, our bodies will break down and you know, flow into other forms of life, and the spirit and life force will just continue forever. So yeah, I guess that is what is guiding me, what's motivating me to do this work, is that I feel like I belong to this great family of life, and you take care of your family.
Thank you. That's really beautiful sharing here. Thank you, Ashleigh. And I was wondering, Mac, if there was more you wanted to add to this sense of belonging and being one with nature.
I think I'm still wrapping the blanket around me that Ashleigh cast out to us all, really. I mean, really, honestly, I feel it's so simple. We don't have to believe anything. We just have to open our eyes and open our hearts and just see what's spread out before us. And I was sharing with some of our people here before we went online. In old Lakota dialects, there is no word for belief. Many of the indigenous people that taught me had no concept of belief. And yet belief is now so fundamental. Everybody always talks about whether you are a believer or whether you have, what are your beliefs and all these things. Many ancient peoples, original peoples, had no concept of belief. They didn't have a concept either, really, of spiritual people or unspiritual people. They existed in this extraordinary world where, you know, every sense that we have, as it were, was delighted and challenged by the experience of living. If we take our Northern Hemisphere experience, this cycle of spring and summer and autumn and winter, certainly challenge, and we should resist the temptation to romanticize wild, because wild is wild, you know. Wild is dangerous. Wild requires us. It's not a fantasy place where we just get all spiritual and sort of, you know, because, you know, in certain countries of the world, as it were, we are definitely food. So, you know, for something or somebody. So, but it is about becoming present, profoundly present, in the way that fire teaches us to be present. You know, fire gives us warmth, gives us light, it gives us a sense of safety on one end of its continuum, as it were. And as we progress along that continuum, one of the worst ways of dying, to be burnt. You know, one of the most terrifying phenomena that exist on this earth, wildfire. You know, this is nature. And so loving nature is this, for me, is like loving life. And most of us have that same continuum within us. The peacemaker and the warrior, the raging sort of force of demonic force of destruction, and the extraordinary creative powers of bringing forth and becoming. We are all of these things, and we tend to push some of them into the sidelines because we find them embarrassing, or we don't want to have them seen, so to speak. But we are composed of the full circle. And as she spoke about children, and I mean, I think we do a terrifying thing with children, you see, because we indulge them in their love of animals and nature, and we think it's sweet, and we laugh and we enjoy it. And we give them all these little things to love, all these little animals that they love to have, whether in the form of bears or you know, all these little stuffed toys that they have, and you know, love and take to bed with them and all these things. But at some point they realize, from a societal point of view, that we don't mean it, that actually we couldn't give a damn about all these creatures, that we would be more than happy to industrialize the whole thing and have square pigs that we could just feed through a machine and slice up, so to speak, for our food, that their suffering is of no account. And the same goes for all the forests and all the vegetables, and the same goes for earth, for soil. That at a societal level, we don't give a shit. You know, that's what children, I think, realize. They realize that we never meant it, that it's cynical, that it's manipulative, and that actually what we're saying to them is none of that stuff matters. The only thing that matters is where you sit on the hierarchy of everything in this life, whichever way you want to cut that. And no wonder our children go veering away from it, because they see it as silly and childish and all the rest of it. So if we were to conceive of an entirely different way of appreciate, if we were to grow up as adults and return to a saner way of apprehending these lives of ours, and then educate our children in that same place, I think they would grow up as most original people's children grew up, you know, and that would be with a great, deep sense of gratitude, of awe and wonder, of appreciation, and with all the practical skills that we could ever wish for, and all the intellectual and discernment skills we could ever wish for, and the scientific skills of invention and creativity, and the artistic skills of story, and all, you know, all different ways in which humans do that. And we would take one or several huge steps back to the very thing that almost, I mean, I don't know what, 90%, let's say 95% of all human beings say they want to be happy. They want to be happy, and then you match their actions against that aspiration, and you say, well, that's very confusing, because they seem to be doing almost everything they can to be unhappy by making the choices they're making, by falling in line with the story that's been given them, this death story. Or as my Native American friends said, when they, after 7 days in the kiva in complete darkness, and they announced they're going to take me to the land of the living dead. And after 7 days in darkness and very little food and all the rest of it, we were pretty wired up by this thought, we're going to go to the land of the living dead. They loaded us into a pickup and they took us to a shopping mall. And they said, behold, the land of the living dead. And then as we did that, they said, but before you get too snobby about this, before you sort of start sneering at these people, they're you. They are all of us, and been enslaved. So rewilding, coming back to this, you see, it's almost like welcoming home and saying, you know, let's engage this homeward bound journey. Let's discover each who we are. Instead of wanting everyone to be like us, let's enjoy the fact that we're different. Let's revel in that and find our way back to what I believe, if we could ever make it, would be a far happier, more well-balanced, sane way of living on this earth. And then the idea, incidentally, of becoming compost for the wildflowers that will come next spring, even if it was nothing more than that, and it doesn't need to be anything more than that, isn't that in itself the most extraordinarily wonderful, wonderful sort of thought and feeling?
Thank you, Mac. and thinking about that kind of cyclical nature of things, is Laura, I was wondering if there's anything you'd like to share about like what you've observed on the land with that.
Something to share, Laura, if you're...
Yeah, go ahead, Ashley. I think I've got Mac's blanket now, so I'm going to let Ash go.
Well, I'm glad that what Mac said really nicely aligns and coalesces with what I also wanted to say, because something that I missed from when I was talking was that this life force energy, this spirit of the earth that I was talking about, I feel like one of the reasons why many people have forgotten about it is because they live in environments where its power isn't very, it has been very subdued and suppressed, you know, by concrete and by lawns sprayed with pesticides, and, you know, walking through a forest that is actually a plantation and doesn't have an expression of this life force that's been allowed to come forth. And that manifests in us, I feel, as like feeling somewhat like cut off and a bit lost. You know, as if you're like walking around in the dark looking for your friends, or you've left a nightclub and they've all gone home without you and didn't say goodbye, and you're just a bit like perplexed. And that is something that is evaporated when you walk into a space like Embercombe. You know, I've seen people come through the gates and sit down in a circle and burst into tears because they feel the aliveness of that place that has been allowed to erupt back to life, and that life force and that spirit is so like pulsating and teeming there that it's like something that you didn't really realize you were missing the whole time, you know, until you arrive and it's all around you, and it's just like this feeling of relief, that it still exists, that it's there, that you found it. And yeah, like Max said, it feels like coming home, and that's something that the rewilding camps, that's one of the reasons why we do them, is so that people can have that reconnection, that remembering, and that homecoming feeling. And the more practical side of it comes in, and we explain how we did it or how we helped it to happen, and how it can be done anywhere, so that you don't just have to come to Embercombe to feel it. You can welcome it back into your life yourself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ash. I think as well, if I can add as well, I think there's often this misconception that rewilding excludes people from the land, and there has been some, you know, high-profile examples where that unintentionally that has been portrayed. And yeah, I think everything we're saying now is about actually, yes, the land needs to be restored in places, and there's work to be done to allow this, as Ashley says, at Embercombe, you know, there's just this abundance of growth and plants and animals and life buzzing around, and that can be done anywhere. But it's also about where we sit in that, and this place where we can feel that connection, and whether that be yeah, a deep spiritual connection for some people, or whether it be the feeling of being a kid looking at a bug or a spider that you might have found, or whether it be a great sense of knowledge and science and understanding. Yeah, that rewilding invites us to reconnect with that knowledge of the land. And I think that, again, we don't have to have this deep Indigenous wisdom either. We can learn about our space, and we can learn about the land, and we can reconnect with that knowledge, and that knowledge can become our naturalized knowledge. We don't need to read lots of books, and what Embercombe offers, and the camps in particular, is this opportunity for people to go, oh wow, yeah, here I am, I'm back on the land, what is around me, what's going on. And it's not about rare species or particularly complex systems. It's just about an opportunity to reconnect and ask some questions of ourselves as to what it is outside of Embercombe that is stopping us from making that connection on a daily basis, or building very slowly those connections back into our life, rather than having this place that we go to feel like we're with wildlife and then going back to our normal lives. It's like, how can those two things become more together? And so that's where the sort of invitation to rewild ourselves, if you like, comes. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that immediacy that you feel when you arrive in Embercombe, that teaching. And I think just before we went live, Matt was talking to that as well, that it's in essence very simple, isn't it, Matt? That it's just it can be in an instant, and Indigenous knowledge of other Indigenous people can help us find our own indigeneity of this land, but also the land itself is speaking to us. And Mac, I was wondering if there was more you wanted to add to what was said.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things really. I will always be grateful to the various Indigenous peoples, and still currently, who have, in my case, taken on this rather unpromising looking student and sort of coached me through a journey of sort of discovering and finding myself in the way that they did. I'll always be grateful for that. And I remember when all I wanted was to be them, really. And so I, at a certain period of time was all set to go and live with them, and came within a hair's breadth of doing that. And my idea really was that I would just simply leave everything that I had here, because that's where my heart was. And this very confronting conversation with them at one point, when it said, Mac, it doesn't matter how many times you do the Nippy ceremony, how many times you dance to the tree in the sun dance, how many times you go into the kiva, how many times you do the bower ceremony, how many times you do all these things, however many years you spend with us, all the rest of it, in the end, this is not your land, and these are not your ceremonies. So you have the biggest challenge. We were traumatized by your society, but we still have a few strands left, and we still remember who we are. You forgot who you were a long, long time ago. And around that time, when they asked me, they said, you were once a tribal people. We understand you're educated, so name your tribes. And at that time in the 80s, I couldn't name a single tribe. One of them stood up and reeled off 20 of our tribes here in Britain, and said, how come we know the names of your tribes and you don't? And I couldn't speak. I just felt like bursting into tears, really. And they just said, because we're curious and ask questions. It's like, whoa. Anyway, in the end, they said, your task. And all this time we spent with you, we have been trying to assist you in this. is you have to go back to your land. You have to sit in the forests, by the streams, by the rivers, go to the ocean, go to the high places, your mountains, your hills, grow your garden, be with your land. And as sure as, day follows night, she will speak to you. You take one step towards life, she will take 10 towards you. Will you have the patience? Will you prefer to fast track it by doing anything you can to avoid the time that this might take? Are you up for the long conversation? Or are you just a workshop junkie and will just run from one thing to another, always consuming, never digesting? Time will tell. So that was in the early 80s. But if I go forward now to the last COP, and in Glasgow, and I'm sat with this very wonderful woman who's a chief of one of the higher, the tribes in the higher reaches of the Amazon basin. And she's speaking to me about Pachamama, our Mother Earth. And she is, as it speaking to me and extending an invitation. Come to Brazil. Go through all the massive effort you will have to undertake to get to where our tribe is. Come to us and we will introduce you to Pachamama. And I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, she's a lovely human being, absolutely gorgeous human being. But I felt rising up from my belly, I have to decline this invitation. And why did I feel that? Because I could feel the mountain behind me. I'm in Scotland. I can feel the mountain behind me, leaning in close and listening. And so I said to her, I am so touched that you extended this invitation. And maybe one day I will. But I can feel my land leaning in close, and to hear how I answer your invitation. Because she's saying, Mac, really? You have to go to the Amazon? We've been nourishing you, meeting you, extending towards you, loving you, challenging you, teaching you. Will you have the courage to say, I have already met our Mother Earth and she's here under my feet. And I will not dishonor her by saying that I have to go to Brazil. Let me introduce you, dear person, to the mountain behind me and the loch in front of me and the heather that are around this and the bracken and those fox and the stoat and all the wonderful beings here. It's under our feet. It's around us. And there may be a layer of tarmac or concrete or whatever between us and them, but in the end, when I go to London, and by the way, I love my visits to London when I go there. I don't hate London, it's just an extraordinary place, but I always remember, this is first and foremost a river valley. And once it was a river valley. And there are floodplains and there is all kinds of stuff here. As George Monbiot says, hippos or whatever in the Thames, there was everything, short tusk elephant, a whole lot. And so I go to the river and I just spend a little bit of time being with the river and remembering and knowing that all those little streams and rivers are still flowing under London, covered over, hidden away, but they're still flowing. And they may be dirty, but the Onondaga, part of the Haudenosaunee people who live on the edge of the Onondaga Lake, look out onto their lake, and they know that they are looking at one of the most profoundly polluted areas of water in the whole of North America. And they also know that the Onondaga Lake is their sacred lake. Doran Lyons just said, he said, you know, we will never dishonor her by calling her anything other than the sacred lake of the Onondaga. We will never stop our legal efforts, our practical efforts, our intellectual efforts, every kind of effort, our spiritual efforts in prayer. We will never stop our efforts to see this lake cleaned, renewed, and once again a fountain of life, where we can dip our hands into the lake and drink the water because it is that clean. And the fact that she's like a chemical and sewage soup right now, it brings us great grief. But she's still who she is, and one day she'll be clean again. And that's our work. I like it, you know, because he's not a depressed human being. He's a wonderful, spirited, 90-something-year-old human being who's still as alive as he was when he was a bantamweight boxer an awful long time, or lacrosse player, or whatever, you know. He's a wonderful human being. But so when we look out on our land, and when we open the papers or read our news wherever and however we receive it, and see this endless litany of atrocities, really, of more old forest going down, more land going down, more whatever it is, I think it would be cool to remember the Onondaga and say, you know, we're just in it for the long term. For as long as we have breath in our bodies, we seek to work towards the future that our children and the children of all species will inherit. That's joyful work. And if we collapse in tears every now and then, that's okay, and helps keep us, you know, remind us of our feelings. But also, you know, we skip and play and have fun and run around and chase and play hide and seek. You know, it's like amazing. So anyway, I'm some years past retirement. Will never, you know, I'm just ever, for as long as I can rub two words together or just wonder, you know, I will serve our Onondaga.
Thank you, Mac. And I just also want to express, you know, such admiration and gratitude for you bringing this vision to becoming Embercombe, because it's one thing to know it needs to be done, and it's another thing, it's showing, I think, everyone, you know, the courage that it takes to really embrace one's land and say yes to it, and then allow it to start speaking to you, and start wherever it is. Yeah. So.
Well, you know, Clemence, I just want to say I thank you, and I really do appreciate that. But it is true, you see, there is a seat for someone in this circle who can somehow, maybe in the early days, speak what's in the heart of loads of people. Then a businessman comes along who also has that voice in his heart and provides the money that allows the purchase of that land. Then other people come along who have skills way, way beyond what I hold, and they bring their skills to bear, and the place begins to take shape. And that's still the story now. I wander around and I'll tell the story and I'll try and speak what's true for me, but there are now many storytellers, as it were, many people who can speak in their own words, in their own way, or they speak through their actions in the way that they simply show up And that's the power of the thing, really. You know, it's like now countless thousands, I guess, have either visited or have heard about, or somehow been moved in some way by the stories they've heard of this little place, and are busy in their own ways and in their own worlds, doing wonderful things. So I'm grateful, but it's a relay. You know, I received a torch that was given from me, and I'm doing my best to keep handing it on. And my little boy said to me yesterday, I said, he'd been talking about whether he'd like to be a policeman. He's 5, by the way, no. And he said, "No, Dad, I'd like to do what you do." I said, well, if you'd like to, you can. But the fact is, you can also just do anything. You know, you could choose lots of different things. And so we're looking forward a little bit later on to planting the sweet chestnuts that we harvested from Embercombe seed 2 years ago, and now got these young trees. And he planted the seeds. And so when he does that sort of thing, it goes in deep, I think. When the robin comes and sits on his hand outside my cabin at Embercombe and eats the bird food, it goes deep. When I tell him about the grass snake that ran across my feet when I was walking up from the bottom to the top of land, that goes deep. When he swam in the lake that myself and some others call Tree Mirror at Embercombe, when there was like amazing storm of rain, and we leapt in the lake in the rain, and we're swimming in the lake, a little 5-year-old and a 73-year-old, and we're swimming together, laughing and laughing. And he said, "Wow, Dad, it's amazing." And the rain's just peeing down, you know. And I know it goes deep. And that's what we should be offering. We don't have to say, you need to think like I think, or you need to sort of say it this way or say it that way. Say, just come and jump in the lake, you know, or sit by this fire and go home with your clothes reeking of wood smoke, or work and your muscles ache a bit and have a lovely hot bath when you get home, and delight in the sensuous experience of being in close relationship with Earth. And not much better than all this.
Thank you. That's a great sort of conclusion to a bit of our chat. I was wondering if anyone had any questions, and if so, please put them in the chat. I see someone has commented and about non-native species, and they say that they're concerned that certain aspects mentioned here might imply that these beautiful sylvan beings are in some way inferior to what we call native species, even though some have been here for hundreds of years. We have so many non-native that have made these lands their own. Laura, maybe, or anyone's got any answer to that comment? That's a very live question, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Clemence. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, that's a toughie to start with. Thanks. I think one of the questions with rewilding about when we think about what people classify as non-native species, in traditional nature conservation, often there are species which have been introduced to a landscape that in traditional nature conservation would in the past have been removed, or actions carried out to dissuade them from continuing to grow. And there may be situations in rewilding where that would be continued. But I think the question we have to ask is what what are the non-natives, you know, why are they growing there, and what are the conditions that have brought about them thriving to the detriment of the species which, if you like, should or could be growing there. And I'm certainly not sitting here saying that to, you know, mighty ancient trees that are not considered to be native to this country should be cut down in the name of rewilding, because rewilding is about the restoration of nature taking care of itself. So in the, I don't know the particular place that you're describing, but if it's an artificially created landscape with non-native trees, then if that area was to be rewilded, it would be about introducing the processes that allow the species that would naturally grow there to return. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those trees would have to be cut down, but what it would mean is if you zoom your perspective out over, you know, trees live for hundreds of years, so over hundreds of years those trees may well be replaced with native species, but their demise would happen as part of that process. It wouldn't necessarily be that you would cut down those trees and plant 2 tiny little saplings and call that rewilding. So I think in the example you're giving, it sounds as though that's a very man-made, artificially created circumstance, and those trees in themselves will have a value in that kind of situation. In other places where we have non-native species that may be preventing the return of native species, then often we have to ask ourselves why they are thriving and those other species are not. And that is normally down to the degradation of land or the lack of the ability for those other species to return in a more natural way. So obviously each example of where you may or may not remove species is individual, but rewilding isn't necessarily advocating the removal of mature trees in order to just call it native. It's about restoration of the landscape so that nature can bounce back and return. I don't know if that answers your question, Anne.
Thank you, Laura. Well, I guess that's a good way to end, to say that if you want to learn more, you can also come to Embercombe and experience everything in our rewilding camps. I just want to also quote what we touched on with the interconnection and interbeing, that what Becky is saying there on the chat is that the most powerful thing to appreciate is that we are nature, and that is not just around us, it is us. And I think that's what we were expressing with, you know, all these experiences of recognition in nature, the recognition of immediacy of the experience of connection. Right, Mac, was there anything else you wanted to add, or
not really, I suppose, just appreciation of people giving up some of their evening to come and sit around this fire with us, and the hope that some of you at least we will see, if we haven't already, in our valley. But also, I suppose, more importantly, the recognition that perhaps that all of us, I hope, will have, is that we are all participants in this. And the most important thing actually is not the coming to Embercombe in a sense, or any other place. It's what we do in our locale, the place that we sort of live and have our being. How we might, should we have a garden, be able to garden a little differently. Conversations we might have with friends. Conversations we might have with people who are not friends. But just understanding somehow that this is all of ours concern. And Embercombe is one place in many, many thousands who are just fumbling our way into trying to do something good and useful. But we all have that opportunity one way or another. So say that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mac, and thank you, Laura, and thank you, Ashleigh, and thank all of you for attending tonight. And looking forward to hearing from you in any form within the Embercombe network. Thank you, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.